And then, the history of the UMC in Asia. Yan. Ito yung directory ng Central Conferences. Like we said, outside the mainland USA, the United Methodist Church has central conferences. Doon sa mainland USA, as we discussed last time, jurisdictions sila, and we were able to take a look at the jurisdictions of the United Methodist Church in the USA. Outside the mainland USA, we have the central conferences, and here is the directory. No, United Methodists in Africa, Europe, and the Philippines are organized by geographical regions, no? Called central conferences. Each central conference consists of a number of annual conferences. The denomination has 7 central conferences, okay? We have Africa, Central and Southern Europe, Congo, Germany, Northern Europe and Eurasia, and Philippines and West Africa. Ayan. So those are the 7 annual conferences. Outside the US, annual conferences are organized 7 central conferences. The central conferences are composed of equal numbers of lay and clergy members. They connect annual conferences for common ministry, adopt regulations as the conditions in the respective regions may require, and elect bishops and fix their tenure. Okay? So we elect bishops in the Central Conference as our leaders, and we are the ones who decide how many years or the term of a bishop can hold office. Okay? Next slide. Central conferences were first established in the Methodist Episcopal Church in Asia, that was in India in 1885 and China in 1897. Then in Europe in 1908, and in Africa and Latin America in the 1920s. Okay, next slide. In the 1930s and 1960s, for a variety of reasons, annual conferences outside the US became autonomous, particularly in most regions of Asia and in all of Latin America. A large majority of these autonomous churches are affiliated autonomous or affiliated united churches with the United Methodist Church and send non-voting delegates to the General Conference. Since the early 1970s, membership in the Central Conferences has increased tremendously, and the number of members now far exceeds those of the 1920s and 1960s. Naging autonomous ang maraming churches na outside the mainland USA, but the membership in the Central Conferences have increased tremendously, especially sa Africa. Okay? Next slide. Okay, today in Africa, there are 3 central conferences. Ito yun. Africa contains 5 episcopal areas, okay, 10 annual conferences, and ministry in 11 countries in Africa. Of course, Africa is such a big continent. Dito sa Congo, which is also a very big Central Conference, has 4 episcopal areas, 14 annual conferences, and ministry in 9 countries. And then West Africa contains 4 episcopal areas, 6 annual conferences, and ministry in 6 countries. Pag sinasabi mo episcopal area, that's the number of bishops also. So Africa Central Conference has 5 bishops, Congo Central Conference has 4 bishops, and West Africa contains 4 bishops. Okay, the next slide. Then Europe. In the Europe, there are currently 3 central conferences. Okay, the Central and Southern Europe contains 1 episcopal area, 7 annual conferences, and ministry in 15 countries. They are spread out, no? And in Germany, it contains 1 episcopal area, 3 annual conferences and ministry in one country, just like we are, one country. In Northern Europe and Eurasia contains 2 episcopal areas, 10 annual conferences, and ministry in 14 countries. Okay, next, and then you go on to the Philippines Central Conference, the only one in Asia. The Philippines constitutes one central conference which has 3 episcopal areas, 24 annual conferences, and ministry in one country. So you see, we have the many annual conferences more than the other central conferences. Okay, and then we go on to the history. Of Methodist Church in Asia. Okay. So titingnan nyo, in Asia, next is, ibaba mo po. The United Methodist Church in Asia started early on. No? Pakibaba yung... Ayan. In the continent of Asia, the United Methodist presence has become limited to the Philippines and to recent missions in Southeast Asia and Mongolia. You know, those are new. However, in its predecessor bodies, it was widespread over Asia. In most countries, they have become autonomous churches. So the Methodist churches in Asia have become autonomous, except the Philippines. Okay, next. Annual conferences have their origin in the mission field in Asia. Neighboring annual conferences in India were longing for closer collaboration in the region. In 1884, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church agreed to the creation of a Central Mission Conference, which developed into a Central Conference. A first Central Conference was created in India. Actually, yung Philippines, mission sa Philippines came from India. A second for China, and then sige here. In India, the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1856 and the Methodist Protestant Church in 1900. The country then included also Pakistan and Bangladesh. The Methodist Church in India became an affiliated autonomous church in 1980. Okay, like I said, the Methodist Church in the Philippines came from India. The Methodist Church in Pakistan became an affiliated United Church in 1970. So in those decades, 1970 to 80, yung mga churches in Asia that were Methodist became autonomous. Okay, next. In China, the Methodist Episcopal Church began its mission in 1847 and had to close in 1949. That was after the Second World War. The same happened to the mission of the Methodist Episcopal Church South in China, Manchuria, and Siberia. Of course, because of the Cold War, the onslaught of communism. The Methodist Protestant Church also began mission in China in 1910. Now, Methodism developed strongly in China so that the Central Conference of China in 1923 formally invited General Conference to hold its 1928 session in Peking. But it never came through, but because I said of the ideological war, the communism that invaded China and in Russia. Okay, next. The first autonomous Methodist church was established in Japan as a union of MEC and MEC South. These were the days, 1800s. And the Methodist Church of Canada in 1873, okay, they became autonomous. The mission of the Methodist Protestant Church 1880, the Evangelical Association in 1875, and the United Brethren became part of a larger union with other Protestant denominations that were brought together under the Japanese military government to form the Kyodan, United Church of Christ in Japan in 1941. Okay, so in next. So mission in Korea was begun by the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1885 and also by the Methodist Episcopal Church South in 1897. It led to the creation of the Autonomous Methodist Church in Korea in 1930. From India, the mission spread to Burma, okay, today called Myanmar, to Malaysia, Singapore in 1884, including Sarawak, Borneo in 1901, and to today's Indonesia with Sumatra 1905, Java 1905, West Borneo 1906, and Bangka Island 1911. These churches became autonomous in the 1960s. So, okay. So that era, autonomous ang mga Methodist churches in Asia. Okay. Next. And then mission in the Philippines began in 1899 and will be further described below. In recent years, new mission work developed in the United Methodist Church in Southeast Asia. So these are still United Methodists who work in Cambodia jointly with other Methodist churches, Laos in 2005, and Mongolia and Vietnam. If you see, they are 2002 and 1998. We even sent missionaries from the Philippines who are global ministries missionaries to these countries. Okay. Now let's go to the Philippine Central Conference. Ayan. Yan, sa atin na yan. Okay. Sabi natin nga, ang Philippine Central Conference is still part of the United Methodist Church because we did not declare autonomy. Okay? Yun na lang, Kier, yung hindi yan, yung isa. Yung may John Wesley na figure. An audio. Yeah. Okay, let's listen to this.
The Philippines Central Conference of the United Methodist Church is a collection of annual conferences of the United Methodist Church in the Philippines that are organized much like jurisdictional conferences in the United States. The Philippines Central Conference is considered a member church of the World Methodist Council and independent of the United Methodist Church in the United States. It is also a member of the Christian Conference of Asia and the National Council of Churches in the Philippines as the United Methodist Church in the Philippines, representing the denomination as its Philippine counterpart. The Philippines Central Conference is further subdivided into 22 regions called Annual Conference, under the authorities of 3 episcopal areas. These annual conferences are subdivided into districts, which provide further administrative functions for the operation of local churches in cooperation with each other under the supervision of the district superintendent. This structure is vital to Methodism and is referred to as P-connectionalism. The Philippines Central Conference has a professing membership of about 200,540, but it serves a much larger community of close to 1 million. From 6 annual conferences in 1968, the United Methodist Church in the Philippines has grown to 19 annual conferences located in 3 episcopal areas, and now, with 24 annual conferences. History. The first Methodist presence on the islands was that of Rev. Marge George C. Stull, a minister from the Montana Annual Conference, which was a part of the Methodist Episcopal Church. He originally went to the Philippines as the chaplain of the 1st Montana Regiment and established the First Me Church. In the Stull letter, a correspondence sent from Stull to his home conference for the annual conference, Stull enumerates several of his accomplishments since coming to the islands. Among them is the fact that he commissioned the first Filipino to preach using his elder's privilege in an emergency. In 1908, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church authorized the organization of the Philippine Islands Mission into the Philippine Islands Annual Conference, under the jurisdiction of the Southern Asia Central Conference. The work in the Philippines grew quickly, and in 1936, the General Conference enabled the organization of the Philippines Central Conference during the following quadrennium. This act was ratified at the 1939 Uniting Conference, which created the Methodist Church. The first session of the Philippines Central Conference was held at the Central Methodist Church in Manila, beginning February 29, 1940. Following years of growth, the 1960 General Conference approved a second Episcopal area in the Philippines Central Conference, the Baguio area, which joined the Manila area. The 1984 General Conference mandated the addition of a third Episcopal area, the Davao area. List of Episcopal areas. Baguio Episcopal Area Bishop Pedro M. Torrio, Jr. O.D. OSL, 114,583 professing and baptized members, 639 organized churches, 38 preaching places, 310 ordained elders, 380 local pastors. The geographical areas covers 447,229 square kilometers. This area also handles the Nepal district. Davao Episcopal Area Bishop Ciriaco Francisco, 25,396 professing and baptized members, 127 ordained clergy, 143 local pastors, 201 organized churches, and 40 preaching places. This episcopal area covers an area of 3 million square kilometers. Manila Episcopal Area Bishop Rodolfo A. 143,329 professing and baptized members, 534 organized churches, 208 preaching places, 392 ordained elders, 360 local pastors. The geographical area covers around 300,000 square kilometers. List of annual conferences. Baguio Episcopal Area Central Luzon Philippines Annual Conference. North Central Philippines Annual Conference. Northeast Philippines Annual Conference. Northern Philippines Annual Conference. Northwest Philippines Annual Conference. Pangasinan Philippines Annual Conference. Tarlac Philippines Annual Conference. Northeast Luzon Philippines Annual Conference. Davao Episcopal Area East Mindanao Philippines Annual Conference. Mindanao Philippines Annual Conference. Northwest Mindanao Philippines Annual Conference. Visayas Philippines Annual Conference. Bicol Philippines Provisional Annual Conference. Manila Episcopal Area Bulacan Philippines Annual Conference. Middle Philippines Annual Conference. Palawan Philippines Annual Conference. Philippines Annual Conference. Rizal Philippines Annual Conference East. Pampanga Philippines Annual Conference. West Middle Philippines Annual Conference. Southwest Philippines Annual Conference. Cavite Philippines Annual Conference. Quezon City Philippines Annual Conference East. Southern Tagalog Philippines Provisional Annual Conference East. Ministry Fellowships, United Methodist Youth Fellowship for youth ages 13 to 23 years old. In national level, it is known United Methodist Youth Fellowship in the Philippines, United Methodist Young Adult Fellowship for 24 to 35 years old. In national level, United Methodist Young Adult Fellowship in the Philippines, United Methodist Men for men with ages 36 years old and above, United Methodist Women's Society of Christian Service for women with ages 36 years old and above. Other special group fellowships: United Methodist Elderly Fellowship, United Methodist Church Workers Fellowship, United Methodist Clergy Spouses Association, United Methodist Preachers Kids Association.
Okay, so we saw the Philippine Central Conference, its constituency. Here,
Doc Homer, ano na po tayo? Doon
Doc.
sa...
history na.
Ito po, history. Sandali po.
Bilang ba yan?
The president of the US at that time, who was William McKinley, who happened to be a Methodist from Ohio. It was McKinley who decided to keep the Philippines.
The first missionaries that came to the Philippines were the Methodists and the Presbyterian.
Nagsimula ang Methodism dito through the work of a chaplain in the US Army.
Who happened to be a member of the Montana Annual Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church.
Sila'y nagtitipon pagka-araw ng linggo doon sa Plaza Goiti sa tinatawag na Soldiers and Sailors Home. Yung mga nakikinig na yun ay unti-unting dumami at hanggang sila'y humiling na sana'y mayroon ding ganong pamamahayag para sa kanilang mga Pilipino.
The first ever non-Roman Catholic worship service in the Philippines, that was in August of 1898, led by this Montana Methodist pastor who was the chaplain of the Navy.
They divided the country into areas. So the Methodists were given Central Luzon and Northern Luzon. The Episcopalians, the Mountain Province. The Presbyterian, Visayas, and some other groups, So there was no overlapping. Manila was free for all.
They went by ship to Cagayan, and they landed in Cagayan, and so the spread of Methodism was twofold: from Manila going north, and from Cagayan coming south.
So that it is a period of change, politically and culturally as well.
Pastor ang aking ama sa Sampaloc, sa St. Mark's. Ganun niya, gagawa siya ng sermon at dadali niya yun sa Japanese Army.
Kailangan i-submit muna sa Japanese officer bago yan i-preach. Baka naman merong sasabihin na laban sa mga Hapon.
hindi na tayo ang iglesia. The church actually grew because there was need for people to go to church. May need, may war going on, there was famine, there was no food.
Dahil sa panganib ng digmaan, dahil sa ang kasiguruhan ng tao ay nasa Panginoong Diyos, ay naging masipag ang mga tao sa pagsamba.
First Filipino bishop, si Bishop Alejandro. He was elected during the Japanese time. I think it was in 1944.
Before, there was only one area called the Manila area. The area kasi is defined by a bishop. One area, one bishop. Because in 1960, the General Conference decided that the Philippines would become two areas. Philippines Annual Conference, Manila area, and Northern Philippines Annual Conference, Baguio area. And the churches were rural churches. Most of them did not have organs, mga choirs, a cappella, because the church was the center of the village. And most of our churches in Baguio were not in the towns. They were in the barrios.
Ang seminaryo noon, kung saan ako presidente, it was suspected as a cuddler of communists.
Nag-upo sa martial law at nakulong din ng saglit ay si Bishop Laverne Mercado, pero hindi bilang bishop ng United Methodist, kundi bilang General Secretary ng National Council of Churches.
Pagka meron akong nababalitaan na pastor o kaya salay ko na naaresto, ang aking pakiusap huwag naman sasaktan, kundi yung kanilang kalagayan naman ay maproteksyonan.
Sa awa ng Panginoon, they were everybody were friendly, and I was not asking them whether they are NPAs or militaries or spies. They were very cooperative. What I'm trying to emphasize was, itong ebanghelyong sinasabi natin, it can cut across any ideology.
The difficulty of the Visayan mission is these are islands separated from one another, different cultures, different languages.
Ang challenge doon yung ma-orchestrate mo yung lahat ng islands na yun sa mission.
We went from island to island. And then the part that we did was evangelism through a medical mission. As I was a doctor, we called it free clinic, and then we gathered the people. We did Bible study and what Methodism is. Because they have no idea what Methodism is. Who is John Wesley? What is the quadrilateral? All those things. And then we organized them into churches. And that is how it all started.
Sa Surigao dadaan, o kaya yun namin sa Cagayan de Oro at Iligan, pupunta muna ng Cebu, tsaka pupunta ng Leyte, gano'n. At masaya sila kung nagkikita-kita dahil nga malalayo eh.
So it was difficult really in the beginning. But it's always like that in the beginning, it's always difficult. But there were also some receptive members who immediately became members and tried to attend our classes of trying to train them of what Methodism is. And then they became leaders. And so now it is one annual conference. Isn't that amazing? from no local church to one annual conference with 3 districts in a very difficult terrain and geographical situation, different languages. That is a miracle, and I think it was a miracle.
Abay, napuno yung luneta sa mga miyembro natin. They came from all kinds of local churches in Mindanao, Visayas, as well as here.
Yung power ay naranasan natin yan, yung pagpapatuloy ng empowerment ng Panginoon ay sa ating constant relationship, developing our constant relationship with God through prayer, through Bible study, through gathering with other Christians.
Harris Memorial College introduced pre-grade school education in the Philippines. And Harris Memorial College is the first college to offer kindergarten education as a 4-year course. Mary Johnston Hospital was established long before Philippine General Hospital came into existence. I think it is the 3rd hospital to operate in the Philippines. For law education was started by Dean Jorge Bocobo in the YMCA. He is a Methodist lay leader. And then he transferred the College of Law to the University of the Philippines. Philippine Christian University was established to help the country, more specifically Manila, to develop from the ravages of World War II. The Student Center of Kapatiran Colonial Foundation is the first student center in the Philippines. Hugh Wilson Hall Dormitory. It's the first dormitory in the Philippines. So the Methodist Church introduced dormitory in the Philippines. From basketball, football, baseball, boxing, swimming, lahat yan nag-introduce YMCA. What I'm trying to say is we are losing many of our young people because they are not aware of the very important contributions of the United Methodist Church, not only in the Philippines, but worldwide.
Ang challenge ngayon ay dahil sa maraming mga issues, like the issues on homosexuality. Even in the Philippines alone, the issues on whether you like Duterte or not, these things divide the church. But what I want to say is, while we vary in our thinking, reflection, and our conviction, still our mission is one. Still we can be united even if we are not the same in our thinking. Still we can have that power. And so we continue to hope that the church will continue to do its task of bringing more disciples to Jesus Christ.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess we were able to present in a comprehensive way the Philippines General Conference. So that ends our lecture for tonight. Unless you have comments and questions.